Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O Movie Reviews podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, and I'm here today to review Christopher Nolan's Tenet, and I am joined by two of my wonderful colleagues, starting with Patrick Belin. Patrick, how are you?
Hello from sunny San Diego, where it's like almost 90 degrees, so it's like winter's over.
Oh, wow. Whoa. Well, I'm looking out my window at a very, typical gray, miserable, post Chris Columbus Harry Potter day. So I'm And also here we have Geoff Wallace. Geoff, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. I'm also coming to you from Portland, where the skies, borrow the line of an old novel, tune to the color of a dead television.
I can imagine that.
Ooh, a little touch of Gotham here, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's get into Tenet. As I was saying to you guys before we started recording, we're all Nolan fans here, but this is, certainly the first, Christopher Nolan film where I don't think all of us, saw it on opening weekend, at a place like the Hollywood Theater or something like that. So I want to talk first about, how I saw it, because, I had a really unique experience with this movie, different, frankly, than any experience I've ever had with a movie. I mean, being the, kind of crazed Nolan devotee that I am, and, not having any theaters in my city open, I was kind of going crazy, honestly, knowing that the movie was out there and being seen, and that, I couldn't watch it. So I actually kind of consumed, every bit of Tenet related media that I could, while I was waiting for it to come out on DVD. I read the making of the movie book cover to cover. And actually, I even read the script. So I had the, very odd experience of, actually knowing the story really well before, I actually saw the movie. So when I finally saw it, like I could tell that obviously the dialogue, some of the sound was off, but I was like, oh yeah, it sounds really muffled, but I know he's saying this, because it's in the script. So that was kind of a funny experience to have. But I loved the movie. I mean, in the pantheon of Christopher Nolan science fiction movies, which would be this and Inception and Interstellar. I don't think this film is as moving as those other films, but I still, think it's, an incredibly great popcorn movie, and it gets richer and, more compelling, I think, with each viewing, not only as you kind of, peel back the layers of the time inversion and all of the intricacies and how that worked, but I think it's a really, beautiful story too, and that he's, in an odd way, I think, kind of, making a sequel to Dunkirk. These characters, they're not Cobb, they're not, Bruce Wayne, they're soldiers doing their duty, and it's a lot of it's a lot, I think, about, Christopher Nolan's conception of heroism and what he sees as real heroism, in contrast to the, kind of complete narcissism of Andrei Sator. But I want to move on, and this, I think, might allow us to get to the writing a little bit. So there was this book that came out, the Nolan Variations, by a film critic named Tom Schoen, and Nolan actually cooperated on the book. So there's a lot from him in these chapters, and Schoen wrote something I thought was interesting. He said, "If Inception was his Vertigo, then Tenet, with its time-bending plot, twists and betrayals, acres of brutalist concrete, and Michael Caine cameo, seems destined to be seen as his North by Northwest, the film in which Nolan riffs on all things Nolan-esque." So you mentioned before we started, Patrick, that some of those Hitchcock films, like you don't want to comment on that specifically because you haven't seen those in a while. But
right,
I did want to put the the question to both of you. I mean, I think it gets to what is this film and what is Nolan saying exactly? Like, do you see this as simply kind of a Nolan riffing on all his Nolanisms, or is there
Yes,
something else going on?
absolutely. Okay, let's kind of put that question to the side about the Hitchcock thing. But I remember when I first saw it, one of my first reactions to that movie was, you know what, this is probably the most Nolan movie Nolan has ever done. Where he pretty much cranked it up to 11. His intriguing premise, complicated action scenes. Okay, one of my criticisms of this is that it's not easy to latch on the first time you see it.
No.
I get when you watch a movie, you can kind of peel more layers to the story as you watch it over and over again. But if it requires you to see it more than once just to get the basic point of the movie, I think it kind of takes away a little bit. And a lot of Nolan's movies kind of flirt with that. And I think with here, he kind of went over the edge a little bit.
But it's great for capitalism.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what you're saying, Patrick, about this being kind of the most Nolan movie, and then what Tom Schoen said about the Michael Caine cameo. This is the most self-referential, kind of Michael Caine role in a Christopher Nolan movie yet. I was thinking, because it's not just that he's in there as kind of a token or a mascot. He's playing a character named Sir Michael Crosby, who not only shows up for one scene in this kind of entertainingly ostentatious way, but then they specifically reference him later with John David Washington saying to Aaron Taylor Johnson, like, "Well, Sir Michael Crosby told me about," like it all feels like very like tongue in cheek. Like there's a certain self-aware quality to the movie that I think's in there.
Yeah, that was definitely a cameo. I mean, that role could have been played by just about anyone. I think there's quite a lot of fresh faces in here. J.D. Washington, obviously, and Pattinson. But I guess Nolan just likes bringing in usual faces, right? That's kind of his thing.
Totally.
You had to get one in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Geoff, what about you? Like, what's your take on the movie? Like, do you see it as a riff on Nolanism? Do you see it as something else, or?
I see it as both a riff on Nolanism and also, and this is more with my second viewing, a riff on various Bond tropes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or even, and maybe not even riff, but inversion. Haha. Roll credits. So Patrick was kind of pointing out some of the more, I think, greater structural Nolanisms, and I definitely recognize those. And I also recognized a bunch of, just say, maybe visual or screenwriting tropes. And I don't even know if are Nolanisms, and I don't know if you could even qualify some of them as Nolanisms or just him referencing stuff he's already done. It's a fine line, I suppose. But anyway, some of those things include the man in the suit. Like you have the main character wears a suit a lot of the time. I think that's true of pretty much every Nolan movie, especially when you shoehorn in Interstellar by counting the spacesuit as a suit.
Yeah.
At the start of the film, or toward the start of the film, at the end of the beginning of the film, when they're in the train yard, it's kind of like they're waiting for a train, which would be an Inception callback.
Sure.
There's a ticking clock, which, I mean, that could be any movie, really, but it did remind me of The Dark Knight, which... That
is one of his tokens that he likes using in films, ticking clocks.
I mean, a ticking clock, it's pretty iconic film object. There's also, during that scene, and I think it's obscured by the passing train, but that whoever that initial antagonist is cuts all the teeth out of John David Washington's mouth, which a character putting a knife in someone's mouth just makes me think of the Joker again.
Oh, sure.
Interesting.
Also, to go off of that, at one point, Sator says, "Look at me," which is what the Joker also says in a scene in The Dark Knight. I remember that scene well because his voice becomes so completely horrifying and bone chilling.
Yes.
And then there's some more general Nolan elements, I guess, like there's a discussion on a rooftop. As the author as Tom Schoen pointed out, there's acres of brutalist concrete. And those are all interesting hallmarks to me. But I think the way that he inverts or subverts, misdirects some of his tropes is maybe even more interesting. And Patrick, I remember firing off this list at you over text right after I saw the movie the first time. So the protagonist isn't played by a Leonardo DiCaprio type, played by John David Washington. But there is a Leonardo DiCaprio type cast in the movie, except he's playing, a sidekick. There's a powerful villain who's introduced early on. That would be the arms dealer, but it's actually his wife who's in charge. One of the leads is going to die in the film, but you don't really see it happen because you don't know that it was him that died. And also, there's a crazy scientific device that seems central to unlocking a character's emotions and backstory, but the character is actually unlocking the details of the crazy scientific or sci-fi device. And that last one, I think that's kind of a parallel to, say, Interstellar. Toward the end of the film, where Matthew McConaughey enters the hypercube or the Tesseract. Yeah. And that's a crazy sci-fi device that helps him unlock his own, pent up emotions and backstory, particularly how it centers around his daughter. And I think Inception, you could argue that it does the same thing. There's some kind of scientific device that helps a character work through their emotions.
Yeah, I think you bring up such great references, Jeff, and I think those are all on point.
Thanks.
I mean, I'll say first of all that in terms of scientific devices, I love how simple, like often his sci-fi MacGuffins are. A suitcase that can allow dreamers to share a dream. A revolving door that can invert you and send you moving backward through time. Like even though he explains a lot of mechanics, like I like that often these devices are sort of mysterious, which creates a sense of wonderment, really. And as far as the question of is this his North by Northwest? Well, I think it's funny, like even before this film came out, there was speculation, is it going to be like Inception meets North by Northwest? That was a rumor, and of course, having seen the film now, it's really nothing like North by Northwest, whatsoever. It is a lot like the Bond films, and my first instinct was that this is kind of like Thunderball with time inversion, and I still think that's true to a large degree, because you have a lot of the elements of Thunderball. You have a Cold War doomsday scenario. You have a villain on a yacht with a female accomplice who ultimately turns on them, so there are a lot of those pieces in play. But the funny thing is, Inception was kind of his homage to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, with the snow scenes in particular, and the skiing being very, visually tying those films together. But then I realized Tenet is also kind of an homage to On Her Majesty's Secret Service as well. Like, if you think of Robert Pattinson as the Bond girl, if you think of him as Diana Rigg, basically, and then there's like that element of tragic romanticism that comes into this relationship the film is built around, and then at the end the hero, the spy, is left devastated. So I mean I think there are a lot of influences at play, but of course, like, the really extraordinary thing I think is that none of this feels like super precious. Like all this stuff collides into and becomes its own weird, unique package, and that's what I think why it's ultimately engaging and doesn't feel like he's checking off a list, this thing from Goldfinger, this thing from Thunderball, even though there's a lot of Goldfinger and Thunderball in it, obviously, starting with the gas at the beginning in the Opera House, which I think is very much a Goldfinger thing.
I've seen a lot of chatter in the internet about how this is Nolan's take on a Bond movie, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I agree with that a lot. But he does invert some things, like the main character, where in a Bond movie he would make it well known that he is James Bond, whereas the protagonist doesn't even have a name.
Yes, yes.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, and also
But
too,
yeah.
like there's always, even though Bond, has some everyman qualities, even though he's obviously a fantasy figure, the protagonist is very different in that he doesn't have that kind of aristocratic quality that Bond has. Like, anytime he's in disguise, he's as a fireman, he's a SWAT
Right.
guy. Like, he's always like, kind of associated with these sort of, working class jobs. Like, he feels like much more down to earth than like.
Well, he's also CIA. He's not MI6.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's true.
And I think if we can bring in some Bond backstory for a second, that would, if the protagonist, if JDW's character is an American equivalent of Bond, he wouldn't have any of Bond's, posh upbringing as an orphan who is adopted by the state, by the crown.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would make more sense that you'd have some more working class elements and not the pomp and airs that Bond would have grown up with.
Well, I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he's inside the wind farm at the beginning, and just like having this slightly like surreal and disjointed and beautiful montage of him doing pull-ups and the ladder, him checking the gun and then putting on the vest so he can blend in with these people who have come to service the wind farm. It creates this impression of like a very human, like man of the people who's kind of just there, doing his job, and to some extent, I kind of wish that there was like some sort of backstory, because I really love the way like Nolan does intricate backstories. I love how we in the Dark Knight trilogy have such an understanding of Bruce Wayne's life from childhood to adulthood and middle age, and same thing with Inception and Cobb, and having a sense of his whole history with Maul, with Marion Cotillard's character.
Mhm.
I kind of miss that depth in this film, and I get like why like he didn't want to do that. Like, he was going for a more like in the moment experience. He didn't want to go down the road of all this Freudian backstory. But I hope he gets back to that kind of like melodramatic stuff eventually, because that's kind of what got me into Nolan in the first place.
Right. I don't know. When I saw it for the third time the other day, what I kept returning to was, this is a kind of movie that that's just begging to be expanded some more. I feel like this is the second film. This is I felt like Tenet was the Dark Knight, but Tenet didn't have its Batman Begins.
That's interesting.
I kind of feel that way, because they refer to this war. They only give you very small snippets of what happened with the crazy guy. When he first found the thing.
Sator.
Yeah.
Sator.
This idea of time inversion war is very intriguing, and I feel like they should have expanded on that more.
Yeah, I mean, did anyone else get the feeling like it would be cool to see this distant future when the world's going to hell, and see Tenet being founded to counteract these people who are sending messages and gold back to Sator from the future?
That would have made for an awesome spectacle and enriching backstory. It's also pretty much the exact same feeling that I had after I watched Inception for the fourth or fifth time. That film really feels like it's set in a universe in the same way that Marvel film is set in a cinematic universe. I found myself wondering, like, how does this dream invading technology impact everyday life? Like, what is going on elsewhere in the world if this exists? I wish that film had some kind of expanded narrative universe, whether through sequels or like a TV series or even comic books or something. And I totally agree that this film, Tenet, should probably have the same. And I kind of wonder if Nolan is just sort of resistant to either cashing in on that, or if he wants to force people to imagine, what it would be like.
Well, I hope not, because he could easily license this out to create graphic novels to tell that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he doesn't have to make any other films. I think with Inception, they actually did do some graphic novels. Well, not graphic novels, but some comics, because I've seen them on the additional features thing on the DVD, which was interesting.
Well, and there are like ways to do this in a not too straightforward manner. I mean, obviously we've talked about many times, Patrick. You and I are both huge fans of Aronofsky's The Fountain, and that that film had a graphic novel before it even came out that was much different than the movie, and told the story in a different way. So I think it could be interesting to see Nolan do something like that, and it doesn't have to be a straight sequel. But I wanted to move on and talk to you guys about the action in the film, because
yeah
yeah there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, it's interesting because, like, to my mind, I remember Sean Levy of The Oregonian, when the Dark Knight came out, he said Christopher Nolan is not an natural action director. He's someone who has mastered the art of directing action through sheer force of will. And that's something I basically agree with. And I feel like, with him directing action, it's often like, one step forward, one step back. Like for me, the Dark Knight Rises was a real breakthrough for him. Like, I think the underground fight between Batman and Bane, like at that time, to me, like that was like the most classical action scene he had ever directed, in terms of there was real, spatial coherence. It wasn't like, fragmented to the point where you couldn't tell what was going on. And since then, he's had some triumphs, and he's had some struggles. I think he has some of both in terms of directing action in Tenet. So I mean, I wonder if maybe you guys would like to talk about that a bit, and like, what do you see as some action victories in this film, and what do you see as maybe some places where he could still grow, I guess?
Well, the first thing I have to say about that is I saw the extra features on the home release, which gets into the production methods and things like that, and it's pretty incredible. I mean, just by watching the action sequences, I had no idea how they did that, and even watching them actually do it in the behind the scenes footage, a lot of them seem like they didn't know either. they it seems like they were just going along with it and inventing new methods and things like that, which makes it just incredible. Secondly, I agree with you that Nolan is not action is not really his thing naturally. He kind of does it because that's what the film calls for. And thirdly, I think the action sequences in this movie were incredible. I remember the first time I saw it, and they were getting into crashing the 747, and I remember saying to myself, like, God damn it, Nolan, you fucking bastard. You're gonna fucking crash the 747, and he's gonna do it. This is not CG, so they did it. And
also, the funniest thing about that scene to me is that as you see the 747 about to crash, like you see people running to get away from it, and you see like cars being crushed as it barrels through the parking lot.
Yeah, and you know what? That was all real practical effects, because I saw the featurette, and they went to some plane graveyard and they purchased an old 747 to crash.
Yeah, I'd heard that they had done a cost analysis of doing that scene in CGI, and it was just cheaper to use an actual old plane.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's interesting.
I heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and for the hospital explosion in the Dark Knight, he blew up an actual candy factory.
Right. Yeah, it was going to be demolished or something.
Yeah.
So they just used it.
I heard about that. He pushed the envelope with this one, in my opinion, because Well, for me, I've never seen any action scenes like this where you had two flows of time simultaneously interacting with each other. That, to me, I can't even get my mind around it as a filmmaker how to even do that. And a lot of the staff didn't either, and they just kind of did what they could.
I know Robert Pattinson has said that there were times filming the movie where he had no idea like what was going on or what it was about. So I guess even the actors were sharing that confusion.
Yeah.
I don't blame him one bit. Yeah. What about you, Jeff? What's your take on the action?
I share. Well, you haven't spoken yet, Ben, but I sense there's some hesitation in parts. But I feel like I share both of what you guys have spoken to so far. Like the scenes are utterly unique. I can only in say like video games is there anything that I think comes to mind. It did occur to me that I've at least played a number of games with time twisting and inverting, and it makes more sense in that medium just because you're always in control of your character. I thought the backwards fight scene that might stand out as one of the more interesting and maybe future iconic scenes in the film. I mean, the crashing the 747, obviously that's the big one that gets all the fanfare. And it when I watched the movie the second time, it really made me wish that I could have seen it on the big screen, because I feel like that movie or that moment would have been just awesome. The backwards fighting scene was interesting to me, or forwards and backwards, or, relative and inverted, whatever terms you want to use to describe the two different time movements. That was interesting to me because you took something that was so basic, like fighting, and you had to reconceptualize how the movements were done and choreographed. And then you as the viewer discover later on that actually, well, the one person is fighting, offensively, but the other person is fighting defensively because they're the same person. But I don't feel like I've really seen even that sort of subtext to a fight in very many films, much less, a person fighting themselves. That's also not a very common film trope. Even when I watched the film a second time, I felt like the car scenes, while they are really awesome, and I have really no idea how they would have staged that, they seem to be going kind of slow. Like I couldn't suspend my disbelief and make my eyes not look at the walls or the background. It just seemed like they were driving really slow, fast and slow and fast and slow. And maybe that's almost like a nitpick.
I definitely noticed that.
Maybe it actually works in the film's favor by distorting our sense of time. I'm not sure. Maybe it's an unfair complaint to say, yeah, I wish it would have looked faster.
Well, you kind of expect it to, right? I mean, we're so conditioned for fast car chase scenes and things like that.
We're the post Fury Road generation, so
that's true. I will add to that real quick that even though I had already seen the movie, and even though I already had this idea in my head that it seemed too slow, even watched it the second time, once they freed her from the backwards traveling SUV, I did feel myself like untense, like relaxed. So even though the scene didn't seem to be fast enough to my tastes, like it was still affecting me on some kind of more subconscious level. Like the tension still came through, even if the technical presentation didn't quite match what I expected.
Sure.
Well, I definitely relate to a lot of what both of you are saying, and I think for me, like if there's one thing I want to nitpick, it would be the final battle at Stall 12. To me, like that was the part where I got the most confused, and it's kind of confusingly staged. Like oftentimes it's hard to tell who they're fighting. I mean, Sator obviously has all these soldiers working for him, and because we we see them, going through the turnstile, and yet we only like see them, in the distance during the actual battle, and it's often hard to tell like who exactly like our main characters are firing at. But the good news is that I think the opera scene and I think the car chase and the fight in the Freeport are, three of the best action scenes Nolan's ever done. And if this, taught me anything, it's that, if you want Christopher Nolan to direct a great action scene, ask him to do it, twice from two different perspectives.
Right.
Some of those things that I, was complaining about, even back, when Batman Begins, like the ultra fast cutting, you kind of just can't do that if you're doing it from two different perspectives, because that fight in the Freeport, the choreography had to be like so specific, so, disciplined and so planned to the letter. And I think you were getting at this, Jeff. Like, I really like that fight scene because it's fun to see it a second time from, the other direction and see like a moment that looks surreal or impossible the first time around. And it's like, oh, he was just on the floor, like kicking, moving himself, away from himself. And like kind of, it's like, oh, it all clicks into place. And you realize like it wasn't really defying physics the first time. It just looks that way. So, I mean, that to me, I think I agree. I mean, I think that's going to be a future iconic scene, although it's certainly not the only one.
Yeah, this is definitely a memorable movie for me. I didn't give it 4 stars. I gave it 3.5 stars, but that, there's just a little niggling things for me, but I still really highly enjoyed it. And I still have a lot of fun watching it.
One thing that, did confuse me during the car chase, it's like I've watched the movie several times now. For the life of me, I cannot figure out how Sator gets the 2-4-1. Do you guys have any idea like what happened there? Because I'm still baffled. Like I couldn't even figure out that out reading the script.
You're talking about that one piece?
Yeah, the section of the algorithm that they're trying to steal. Yeah.
The first time that I viewed the movie, there were some things that confused me and others that didn't. And then the second time, those things that had confused me made sense, but then I was sort of confused by other things, which is a very novel experience. I feel like I understood it when I watched it the first time. I don't know if it has something to do with inversion, and it's like I need to draw this. This is the wrong medium to explain this scene in.
To answer your question, Ben, the way I read that whole scene, that whole sequence, is Sator from the future already knew what was going to happen. So wherever JD put the 2-4-1, he already knew where it was going to be. That's how I read that scene.
So do you think that I'm probably obsessing over this to just an insane degree? Like, but do you think that like Sator was going to invert again, and this time he would know exactly where it was, or like? Or wait, but no, that's not what you were saying, was it? I'm just digging a hole for myself.
Yeah, the way I see the overall arc of the film was it was always going to end badly. JD was the one protagonist to put a stop to that, and he did eventually, because on the final scene where Sator was going to off himself on the boat, he didn't know that cat was the inverted cat.
Right.
He assumed that was the cat from the original cat. That's what ultimately stopped him.
I also think it's funny too that the protagonist thinks he's special. Thinks he's the chosen one, for lack of a better or less cliched term. But in reality, Priya, Dimple Kapadia's character, chooses him for the mission initially because she thinks he's incompetent enough to lose that section of the algorithm. But there's another thing that Nolan said about the film in the Nolan Variations. He says there's a love story in the movie. It's a love story between those guys. Talking about the protagonist, Neil and Ives, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. And he continues on to say, I set out to make it between the protagonist and Kat. That's the logical Fleming course, but neither myself nor John David felt the writing took us there. I guess I wanted to ask you guys, what do you make of all that? What do you make of the fact that, instead of being, a romance, the relationship between the protagonist and Kat, like now becomes like a more platonic relationship where he's, sacrificing a lot for her, but not hoping to get anything out of it. And And do you feel that the relationship between Neil and the protagonist is enough of an emotional engine to drive the plot of this big 2.5 hour movie?
I think straight away it's an inversion. I should have started a drinking game for every time I said that word. It's an inversion of the Bond trope of the Bond, I think, gendered character dynamics, which would be every movie pre Daniel Craig, right? And maybe pre Brosnan. In every movie, Bond meets he meets a woman and he woos her, and sometimes it's to his advantage, sometimes it's for the sake of the mission, sometimes it's not. And then classically, you'd get 5 minutes of him with Q and M, talking about the mission and talking about gadgets. But the reality of all that would be that most of Bond's interactions with the women that he woos would be, transactional and a means to an end, whereas the behind the scenes figures like Q and M would be the ones that he would have a real relationship with, at least plausibly, because, hey, they're his coworkers and he's known them for a long time. I think the Daniel Craig movies definitely work with that more than the older ones did. You could take a meta tack or a meta angle on the story and just say, well, you haven't actually seen their relationship yet because it exists in the future. It might be a bit of a cop-out, but it is kind of logical.
Well, I like what you're saying, Jeff, about, Bond, realistically, the relationships that would matter would be between his coworkers. And you're right about the Daniel Craig films, where I think they've, done a really, good job, developing Q and Moneypenny, and especially Judi Dench's iteration of M.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I feel like with Tenet, it's almost like a Bond film if the, kind of the main relationship in the film were, but not between like Bond and his love interest, but between Bond and Felix Leiter. Like, I guess is the closest analogy, maybe.
Oh, the American CIA agent?
Yeah.
I could see that, yeah.
Although, of course, in this case, it's a American protagonist, a British sidekick, so another inversion.
Out of all the relationships, I thought the one between protagonist and Neil was the most interesting. I thought it was interesting how Neil was automatically comfortable with him, and it as if he knew him already. And of course, it turns out he did. He's always known protagonist this, but at this sliver in time, protagonist didn't know who Neil was. And I thought that was interesting how they played off of each other, and I think that really worked. If anyone is saying that there's supposedly some romantic thing going on with protagonist and Cat, I didn't really see it that way. I mean, I want to kind of go back to this idea of Tenet being kind of a play on Bond and turning it on its head, where in the Bond universe there is obviously a romantic or sexual or transactional relationship with the women in that movie, but I felt like Nolan was turning that on its head, where protagonist didn't have that with Kat, but there was still a very strong bond between them. Now, going to the overall way it was directed and the screenplay played out, I feel like there was just too much going on in this movie where they didn't allow that relationship between Kat and protagonist to play out and to breathe a little bit. Like the way Cobb and his characters were able to interact with each other. And I think that's too bad, because I think there was more to say about protagonist and Kat together. Now, in your question in the email about Ives, I didn't see much of a relationship in this with Ives. He seemed kind of like a supporting cast.
Yeah, I think you guys both make some really interesting points, and do I think the protagonist and Neil are enough of like an emotional heart for the film? I mean, I think the answer is yes and no. I mean, I almost wish their bond was more intense. I almost wish it had the weight of Bruce Wayne and Alfred and the Dark Knight trilogy, or Cobb and Maul and Inception, or even Cobb and Ariadne in
Mhm.
Inception. I mean, that is
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting relationship. You know, this young woman who's guiding this broken down guy and forcing, you know, him to, you know, confront his demons for the sake of her survival and the survival of her colleagues. I don't think Neil and the protagonist, you know, their connection it doesn't have quite the same, you know, force. I think Anne Hathaway and Matthew McConaughey, that's another, you know, good kind of a like central friendship in a Nolan movie that's a good example. But I think though that, you know, the protagonist and Neil do have a really interesting and compelling relationship in a lot of respects. I mean, it's interesting like how all this stuff from outside the film, you know, still feels like a part of the film. You know, whether it's, you know, knowing that the protagonist in the future sends Neil back in time to die, basically, you know, not unlike John Connor sending his own father, you know, Kyle Reese back to die in the Terminator films. And
I'm glad you brought Terminator into this because I was getting Terminator vibes when I saw it.
it's funny. It's like the more like I thought about the plot, it's like there is so much, you know, Terminator-ishness happening here.
But I mean that in a good way, though. I feel like the director guy, I feel like he could take notes from this movie.
James Cameron?
James Cameron, yeah.
You know, it's funny, and I don't know if you guys have had this experience. I think in a lot of ways Cameron is more talented than Nolan. I think, you know, Cameron is, you know, has maybe stronger narrative instincts, is a better director of action. But this might sound weird, but I just like Nolan better. Like I like, you know, kind of the attitude in his films better. Like there's something, you know, maybe like a little more sincere, a little more earnest about Nolan, where sometimes like you'll see like a sentimental trope in a Cameron film, and it feels like he's just doing that to, you know, play to the crowd. Because I feel like, you know, Nolan like actually cares about, you know, the relationships between his characters, and, you know, Neil and the protagonist, you know, parting ways at the end. You know, we just saved the world. We can't leave anything to chance. And, you know, John David Washington's, you know, tearing up. Like, I feel like Nolan really means that stuff. Like, I feel like he's not, you know, saying like, oh, you know, I have to cap it off, you know, with a, you know, emotional friendship scene to, you know, really, you know, get people going.
If I were to say that James Cameron is more talented, I would say he's more talented in the technical sense. But
Sure.
I would say I would prefer Nolan as the creative visionary.
Yeah.
I would say Nolan has the creativity that James Cameron doesn't have.
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, James Cameron basically invents new technology every time he makes a film.
Right.
And his action scenes, you know, you want to talk iconic, like,
oh my God, they're like the best in the business.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You look at Terminator 2, it still stands up to today.
Yeah, I mean that final, you know, chase on the freeway. I mean, my God, yeah. It's just you. I mean, honestly, like nothing today except like Fury Road is even close to that.
Look, Jeff, the van in T2 is actually moving really fast.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, he's top notch. Wrote the action scene playbook, and he does have some good world building, I'd say. Terminator for sure, although he probably should have kept his claws in that one and not let other people, you know, create all those stupid and terrible sequels.
Yeah, vision like McGee.
Yeah. I'd say his one really like self-conscious attempt at a sort of franchise with world building as a central facet, Avatar. I don't really like, I'm not clamoring for, you know, graphic novels of that universe. I don't really care about how else things are working in that world. Whereas, yeah, I do in Nolan's worlds.
Yeah.
With Inception and so on. Yeah.
Oh,
definitely.
Yeah. You know, there's always that feeling with Nolan. It's kind of the opposite feeling of like, oh, we're now going to get 4 Avatar sequels. There's always with Nolan, there's a sense of wanting more, in a
Oh
good
yeah.
way, in a satisfying way. Like even with the Dark Knight trilogy, he ended with Joseph Gordon-Levitt on that platform, ascending in the water dripping down, like right in front of the lens. Like that felt like whole another world is opening up, and there's a kind of like magic, I think, in being just sort of left to imagine what that looks like. And I think Tenet is sort of the same way, where there's this whole other story that's that the gates are being flung open
Hmm.
toward basically the future, this this war, what happens to the planet. And Sator says that the people in the future want to destroy the past because their oceans rose, their rivers ran dry. So I mean that kind of like puts the burden on Neil and the protagonist. Do they now have to deal with that crisis as well? They stopped Sator, but does that mean they stop the Earth from being completely destroyed? There's a whole nother Pandora's box being cracked open there, I think.
Yeah, I definitely want to see this expanded. And if I were to throw in my 2 cents into this, I would throw a wrench into it and make it as the people in the future didn't want to destroy everyone's world. They just wanted to destroy somebody else's world.
I mean, this whole idea, there are people in the future that believe if you wipe out the past, or wipe out somebody's past, it fixes all these problems. And then there are people who believe if you do that, you destroy everything. You destroy all of reality. I mean, what do you guys like make of the fact that the idea that there could be people in the future who believe that that's a
Mhm.
solution? Because to me, it's kind of a terrifying and weird, fascinating thing.
I
Huh?
think it's called the grandfather paradox or something.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't think
Uh,
they answered the question in that in the film, but it is an interesting thing to get into with in this world of Tenet. And I think that's what they were trying. That's what Nolan was also trying to explore.
Right. Right. Well, as Pattinson says, there's no answer. It's a paradox. Jeff, you were going to say something?
I had several different answers occur to me at once. I think you could maybe argue that the film presents four different takes on that idea. The future destroying the past. Does the future still exist? Through the four central characters of protagonist Neil, Sator, and Kat. And I think I don't quite have the right philosophical terms to attach to these different viewpoints, but Neil seems to be kind of pleasantly fatalistic about it. And
Mhm.
I don't know to what degree he knows that he's going to die, but he does seem to have sort of a pleasant resignation about himself.
Yeah, it's as if he's at peace with his fate.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he brings. That's what I noticed of his persona or his the way he holds himself.
He very much reminds me of famous sci-fi Kurt Vonnegut. He very much reminds me of a Vonnegut character in that he's probably seen horrible things, and yet he knows the world just keeps going, so he adopts this kind of calm, apathetic persona, even though he's not apathetic. He is fighting for things. Whereas JDW's character is much more, he doesn't know how things are going to go, so
Uh-huh.
he's fighting very aggressively to keep things from going bad. Sator has seen that both the past and the future are terrible, so why not destroy all of it? And who cares? I guess that's sort of like malignant nihilism, which almost seems like a contradiction of terms. And I think Kat could also present like a fourth take on it, which is she's really the one who has, I guess, just the most tangible sense of faith in the future as presented through her trying to care for her son. Like the three men really don't know what they're doing. And
Mhm.
I think some of Sator's dialogue kind of taps into that, especially toward the end. He says he calls JDW's protagonist a fanatic, right? He doesn't know what he's doing. Like he can't see what he's doing. He doesn't know if what he's doing will have any effect. And Sator describes that as fanaticism. But Kat actually has something that she can watch and see how it changes. And yeah, so maybe she's sort of an optimist. I'm not entirely sure. It's got me thinking about the Netflix series Dark. I don't know if either of you guys watched that. Actually, watching that before watching Tenet makes Tenet easier to understand. It is the most pretzel that you could ever come across. It's pretty brilliant and insane. Grandfather paradox through and through.
So here's another general comment that I want to make. Going off what you just said, was I feel like this movie leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions, and I do like that. But I think a lot of people don't, which is why this movie didn't do all that well, I think. But it asks very big questions and it leaves things unanswered, and I kind of like that about Nolan movies. It doesn't answer the grandfather paradox. It doesn't answer a lot of things. It leaves a lot of things open. Even when the scientist was trying to explain this whole inversion thing, she just stopped herself and just said, "Don't think about it so much."
I have to agree. I mean, I've always said, I'm fine with unanswered questions. I mean, I'm even, occasionally fine with cliffhanger endings. My only requirement is that a movie, take us somewhere, that it have some sort of, complete arc, which is one thing I like about this film. You have the protagonist at the beginning, just a guy, doing his duty, carrying out a mission, and then you have a subtle but I think really important change where at the beginning he's willing to do whatever it takes to win, damn the cost, and then you get that moment where Katz says, you're just like Sator, no thought for me or my son. What do you think he's going to do to me now? And I think that's a real defining moment, and it paves the way to the protagonist killing Priya at the end, where he has now evolved so much from this do whatever it takes mentality, even if it means sacrificing lives, to to the point where he's willing to risk the failure of the mission to protect an innocent life, to the point where he's even really willing to kill the architect of this entire plan he's been a part of, and take that risk, which is a huge risk to take, and he has to have faith in the fact that he's doing what his future self wants him to do, because as he says so eloquently at the end, we're both working for me. And so that's why I think like it kind of hits that sweet spot where there's both a sense of completeness and a sense of unfinished business. Like you kind of get both best of both worlds in a weird way, I think.
Well, what I was referring to was the larger philosophical questions are unanswered, but the plot itself, I thought, rounded itself out at the end. I'm sad that there will not be another one like this, considering how much it cost and how much it didn't make.
Yeah. Do you think it would have made the money had there not been a pandemic?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean,
I do.
You look at a film like Interstellar, which was one of the more divisive Nolan films, and made more money than Dunkirk, but given the budget, was actually not as profitable as Dunkirk. And Interstellar did still do extraordinarily well. It made over $600 million worldwide. I mean, if not for the pandemic, I think Tenet would have been very profitable as well, especially since it was all Warner Brothers. It wasn't like Interstellar, which was split between Paramount and Warner Brothers. So I think, there are a lot of courses Nolan could take. I mean, he's pretty much a part of the establishment now. He can get away with a lot. Mm-hmm. If he really wants to be safe, he can always go back and make something like on the budget level of Insomnia or the Prestige, which mm-hmm. I would be totally cool with.
And he still would draw a lot of crowds.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, considering how popular Inception has been, especially over time, people still like it. I think this movie would have brought the crowds out, if not for the pandemic. There was a lot of speculation that this was going to be in the Inception universe.
My feeling has always been like, well, these films don't all have to be in the same universe. It's fine if they're their own separate thing. But just as an mm-hmm. interesting thought experiment, I tried to create, like in my head, a history of the world according to Christopher Nolan, kind of organizing his movies chronologically. So I'll tell you guys now. Like I would do The Prestige, Dunkirk, Following, Memento, Insomnia, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, Tenet, Inception, and then Interstellar. So that's we're all one universe. That's how I would organize it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
And the thing I was like really geeking out about was at first I was thinking like, well, Tenet should come after Inception, but then I was like, wait a second. Any kind of high-tech hardware they have in Tenet is only because they've been given it, by the future. Whereas by Inception, society is advanced enough where they can invent dream-sharing technology. So that led me to believe that Inception is actually post-Tenet. And that
Post-Tenet?
Yeah, so that's...
Okay. Can you imagine if they meshed the two?
I know! You have inverted dreams as well.
I think I'll walk out of the theater with my brain mushes.
Yeah.
I might actually explain dreams quite well, though.
It would.
Mm-hmm.
Could you throw the Tesseract from Interstellar in there just for good measure? To
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I had two more things that I wanted to bring up, and one of them is just kind of off the beaten track observation. And the other one I hope you guys haven't heard of, because I just read about it this morning. I'm hitting my hands against the table. It added a whole new level to the movie for me. So first I'll bring in this concept. I was curious how much you guys felt like Nolan was making some kind of meta statements on directing and filmmaking. And I put together a sequence of scenes, and I'm sure there are a lot more that you guys can throw in, but the film starts with the conductor or director being shot. There's an audience, and they're hijacked and then put to sleep. Later on, you get there are a bunch of really precious images in a vault that are, destroyed. You get things like the scientist saying, "Don't think about this." And then you also have, when they hijack the plane, they throw all the gold on the ground, which just made me think of directors just like throwing money away. And I didn't go past that, but it was kind of hard to ignore, especially just the director being shot, the audience is held hostage and only to be put to sleep. Like, that was a very interesting start to things. I don't know if you guys saw any other sort of potentially meta moments in the film.
No. I forget where I saw this. It might have been a YouTube video, but some have said that Nolan's films are like a meta commentary on the process of filmmaking itself. Having seen a bunch of behind the scenes things on a lot of his movies, I haven't heard him really comment on that directly. But the one thing that he does comment on is he wants to push the envelope. He wants that's a common theme for him, like with his movies, and he definitely pushed it with Tenet, with the whole time inversion thing and filming the way it was put together. It's just ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic. I think obviously the ones he's made that most directly correlate to the filmmaking process would be Inception and The Prestige, and even the Dark Knight trilogy as well, because when Ra's al Ghul says theatricality and deception can be powerful agents to the uninitiated. I mean, that he's basically teaching Bruce how to be a filmmaker right there.
Yeah.
You get into Tenet, the conductor being shot, like that's a really, really good parallel. And I just love that scene too. Like I love how those terrorists, they're not just terrorists, they're dicks. I mean, one of them like smashes a cello just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
These guys are assholes. The thing that often gets brought up that I thought was interesting was in Inception, when they're checking out the architecture of the dreams, it's really like, doing location scouting. And I was kind of intrigued by how a lot of that comes back in Tenet. Like just Neil going to the Freeport and checking out, the fire and safety protocols. It's
Yeah.
almost like a director, going in and, looking like, what do I need to, know about this location? What are the potential hazards? And then, when the 747 comes in and, they break into the various vaults, it's almost like, okay, now action.
I was just thinking that you could even argue that Inception is about trying to twist a producer's arm to make your film. You're like trying to put your crazy idea in this guy's head so he'll give you money to do your thing.
Yeah.
Well, and then, of course, what happens with Cobb is, one of the producers insists on acting in the film, and Ken Watanabe's character, which I imagine is everybody's nightmare, like having that guy looking over your shoulder. With Tenet, if Priya is the producer, it's kind of like the producer who won't give you all the information or won't let you off the leash. And then if we accept John David Washington as the director, like at the end he shoots the producer in the head. So I mean, there
you go.
Yeah. So the thing I found just today, and I'm curious if you guys had read about this, but the Sator squares.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rotes.
Right. Yeah. Have you seen these, Patrick?
Sator squares. What are you talking about?
So I'll send you a link on your phone here, but it's like ancient Roman palindrome square where all the words fit together, and they're all words that are used in the film. So like the top word, at least in this photo, is Sator, which is the character's name, and then the next one is Arepo, which was the art dealer or the art forger that you never see. Yeah. The middle word is Tenet, and then the next word is opera, and the last word is rotus, which I also noticed is the Sator's security business that is in charge of the turnstile in the Freeport in Oslo.
This is pretty fascinating.
And rotus is also some form of the Latin word for wheel. Yeah, and I don't know, I was reading that today and I was like, what? You're just inspired by this bizarre old piece of history, this curious square of words?
That's pretty fascinating. I'm going to read this in a bit.
I love that. I love, how he brings sort of like a continuity to the names in the films. Kind of like in Inception and like the notion of games from, having Robert Fisher, kind of like Bobby Fischer, and then Ariadne, the guide, leading you through the maze, and then here you get it all referencing the Sator Square, and I love that even Arepo gets in there. This character who we never meet, who they have, right? That comes from there. It's fun.
Ben, I think you said something earlier that a lot of his films seem to point to something outside, something in reality, and this is just another instance of that, a very rich one.
There's one thing, and I don't want to get into this too much, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. This theory that Neil is actually Max, Kat's son. What do you guys think of that? Because it's a very pervasive theory. A lot of people seem to have bought into it.
I think it's believable.
The one thing I was wondering about, though, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but when you're inverted, do you age in reverse?
Yeah, right.
I wondered about that too.
Because if that was the case, wouldn't like Neil and Max not be able to be the same age and not be able to be different ages in the same like time frame? Yeah,
because when protagonist went back, went in reverse, he developed a wound when he went back to the plane. So you would think, does this apply to your whole life? Like, do you become smaller?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's inverted entropy, right?
Because the wound gets healed when he gets stabbed with the lockpick, or at least it seems to be healed. So it's funny.
Does this relate to that Curious Case of Benjamin Button? Is this like the sci-fi version of that?
Oh no!
Well, I would say that I think it's a pretty interesting idea, and I think it's believable that Neil is Kat's son.
Well, if you like this podcast, please click thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews. And be sure to check out all the great reviews and content we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, here with Patrick Belin and Geoff Wallace. And I wish I had prepared something backward to say at the end, but I didn't. So, as usual, happy movie watching.
Oh, and here's a fun fact for everyone. In those scenes where they shot Kat, they actually did recite their lines in reverse.
That's so cool. I love
Wow.
It's so amazing too to think that, like, I mean, like, it's one thing to recite your lines in reverse. It's a whole other thing to do that with a Russian accent.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's true. Yeah.